Hi everyone, welcome to Mix Masters. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to start with the very first square on panel number 1, and it's called 5 brush mark styles. And we're just going to start real super basic and easy to roll into this. I'm going to cut away for a second and show you what my paint looks like. I'm going to be using one color today, burnt umber, and you can use this in either oil or acrylic. Your results will look slightly different, but you'll still get the same effects and the same experience through it. Okay, so hold on one second. This is the oil paint that I'm using. It's made by Rublev, and it's from the Natural Pigments website. And this color is Cypress Burnt Umber Warm. And I've got a little bit of Oleogel on my palette to help make this move a little bit. And I've already mixed it in. And this is kind of the consistency that I'm going for. So it's not really stiff, it's not very liquid, it's just movable. Okay, so for the first brush mark style that I'm going to use, I'm going to work with a dry brush, and we're going to scrub the paint onto the surface. So I'm using a hog's hair bristle brush. Let me bring this over here. And I'll also show you the measurement of it. It's quite small, and it looks like it's about a 1/4 inch brush, and it's hog's hair, so it's very stiff. You can hear that sound right there. And I'm going to put a little bit of paint on it, not much. I also have a rag in my hand for oil paint. I'm using a blue rag. I fold it in quarters just so I can continue to use all sides, unfold it and refold it. Usually when I'm having a painting session, one of these rags will last at least 3 or 4 hours as I'm working and need to wipe off my brush. So I'm just going to take a tiny amount of paint onto my bristles. Let me show you that. About that much, not much at all. You can barely see it on there. And I'm going to start up on my canvas, and I'm just going to scrub it. This burnt umber is a little bit on the red side. It's a pretty color. It mixes really well with blues to create neutrals and dark shadows. Okay, so that's our scrub. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a palette knife. I'm going to apply the paint with a palette knife, and I'm going to grab a pretty generous scoop. I'll show you what this looks like on my palette knife. Okay, and I'm just going to come over, I'm applying it, I'm putting my finger on the knuckle of the palette knife. So the paint, I'm going to smear it on kind of like I would a cake. And this is a palette knife. And you can see the difference with it. I can get in there and I can, move it around a little bit more, but that's pretty much it. It's kind of thick on there. And after I finish these, I'll go up and I'll show you what it looks like up close so you can see the texture of both of them. The next thing I'm going to do, the third brush mark style, is a fully loaded brush. And for this, I'm going to use a softer bristle brush. In this case, I'm going to use a round brush. And my round brush is pretty tiny. If I show you in comparison to my gloved finger, you can see it's a pretty tiny brush. And I'm going to fully load it with as much paint as I can. I'm not putting paint in the ferrule or the metal part where the brush goes into the metal part. I don't want to get my paint stuck in there, so I kind of keep my paint toward the tip of the brush. And you can see I've got a fully loaded brush. That's a lot of paint on there. And this is just to see what happens when you paint with a fully loaded brush. I can go in there and work this around. I can cover quite an area with it. And this is without adding any mineral spirits to it, very little medium. Most paints don't require medium, but you can see it covers a nice area. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you edging. A lot of people wonder how you get straight edge lines, and this is one way to do it. I'm going to go back to my hog's hair bristle brush, which is the small brush that I originally used for the scrubbing, and I'm going to load it up with paint. And let's see, this is kind of what it looks like right now. So you can kind of get an idea of how much paint is on that brush. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to pretend that I have a straight line down here. Maybe I'll curve it just a little bit. And I need a crisp edge on one side. And then I'm going to soften it on the other side. So I'm going to start here, press down, and usually I make sure that the bristles, when I press down, are expanded to hit the edge of the line where I want it to go. And I'll follow that line down. And you can see it starts getting a little bit lighter, so I might have to go over that again. As a matter of fact, while I'm here, I'll just grab a little bit more paint and pull that down just a little bit, just to get that edge nice and crisp. And then I'm going to pull the paint over on the other side. And that's one way to get a really nice, crisp, solid, sharp edge. And again, it's much easier to make soft, sharp edges than it is to make soft edges. So you want to go in and, you want to try and keep your edges as soft as possible, as long as possible. And then you can get one edge soft and one edge sharp. Okay, so that's that. And then the last one we're going to do is with thinner or with medium. If you're using oil paint, you can use Sansodor. If you don't want to use thinners, because I've been teaching a lot of people how to get solvents out of their studio, because solvents are toxic, and it's the toxic part of oil painting that you want to try and relieve yourself of in your studio practice. If you are okay with a thinner, you have an odorless thinner, and you want to try this next one with me, that's totally fine. If you would like to use the alternative, you would use burnt umber matte acrylic. So you can either buy burnt umber and then add matte acrylic to it and then paint it on, and that would be instead of a thinner. Obviously, you want to do this under your oil paints. You cannot put acrylic paint on top of oil. And if you're an acrylic painter following this exact same exercise, then you're just adding water, or you're adding some type of extender like a medium or a glaze to your paint to thin it out. And that would be the equivalent for acrylic painters. Okay, so I'm going to turn this back over here, and I'm going to show you what happens with the paint when I add a little bit of odorless thinner to it. Okay, so I'm just adding a little bit of thinner to it, and it's going to thin out, and here we go. So it's kind of like the scrubbing. This is the odorless thinner. Sansodor is what I'm using. And you can see it gives kind of a more rich feeling than this original paint up here. Also, the reason why a lot of artists use thinner early in their paintings is because it dries pretty fast. And then you can have a toned canvas, or a canvas that already has some color on it, that you can then paint on top of. So I'm doing this with a hog's hair bristle brush. Let's see, I can also do it with a soft bristle brush so you can see the difference between the two. Let me find a soft bristle brush. I'll add a little bit. That's another thing about Gamsol or thinners, is that they evaporate rather quickly. So as you're working, if you do decide to work with them, make sure you have a lot of ventilation. This is with a soft bristle brush. Make sure you have a lot of ventilation, and that you may have to add a little bit of terps as you go along, because they do evaporate. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the 5 different brush mark styles I want to show you. We probably won't get too much into palette painting, but I wanted to show you what that looked like. Okay, I'm going to bring this up a little bit closer so you can see what's going on. Here's the scrubbed brush mark. This is the palette knife. You can see it has some crests in it where the form is peaked, especially this like bottom ridge. Let's see. There's like a bottom ridge there. You can kind of see where the light catches it. And then you've got the fully loaded brush. And that's a very thick paint application. Let's see if I can catch the light on it. There it is. And then here is edging. So you can get a sharp edge going down and then soften it on the other side. Of course, if you're working smaller, you would just use a smaller bristle brush. And then here, these last two marks, one is done with a hog's hair bristle brush, one is done with a soft bristle brush. And this is with use of turpentine, odorless turpentine. I used Sansodor. Okay, congratulations on finishing your first square, which are the 5 brush mark studies. And now, before we go, I have another little task for you so that we can pre-prepare for a future square that we'll be working on. Actually, 2 different squares. So I'm gonna move my easel because I need to have a little bit more workspace. I'm moving this up so you can see it. And we're gonna be working on panel 1. On the right side of the panel, the bottom 2 squares. And on these 2 squares, I want to go ahead and prime them with, or prepare them with burnt umber. So we're going to have a wash on both of these because we're going to need a contrast in order to complete our cool value scale and our warm value scale, which we're not going to do right now. We just want to go ahead and prepare them with a prime coat just to, put some color on them. And we want the color to be able to dry. So if you're using oil paint, you have a couple of options. One is using an odorless turpentine like Sansodor as an example, and going ahead, I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do this. One way is a very traditional way, and it serves 2 purposes. One is to clean the panel, and then the other is to help saturate it, and then it makes it easier for the paint to glide over it, to prime it. And it's something that I haven't taught very much in my classes because I'm trying to get rid of turpentine and I'm trying to get rid of any type of mineral spirit and toxic fumes from my studio altogether. I do have a fan going in my studio right now, which is helping with air circulation. So even though I don't typically do this in my own painting, I do want to show you the method that is traditionally used before laying down a first layer of paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clean rag, one of these, and I'm going to put some turpentine, some odorless turpentine on it. I'll show you how much I'm using. So I'm kind of using about that much. And I'm going to do the left side with this. And I'm just going to kind of rub this on here. And it's kind of cleaning it. It's saturating. And it's just kind of I want to get lint off of it. I like these blue towels because they get rid of lint. And I don't need this soak like sopping wet. I just need to kind of get it kind of like covered. So I can kind of show you. Let's see if I can hold on a second. Okay, this is an awkward angle, but I wanted to show you that you can see that slight sheen in comparison to the other squares. That's showing you that it's coated with the turpentine, the odorless mineral spirits in this case. Okay, now I'm back and I'm going to go ahead and brush on my burnt umber. And it kind of glides on easily. I'm using a small bristle brush. Usually I use a big brush in a big area when I do this. I work pretty large typically, but these are just little squares. And I'm going to maneuver this around just to cover the entire thing. Now, I do not like using mineral spirits at all. So the second option I'm going to show you for oil painters is how to do this without mineral spirits if you don't want to use acrylic paint. So I've mentioned before that an alternative to mineral spirits is to use acrylic paint with matte medium because the matte helps with gripping. If you go to the website for Golden website talks about, they've got technical sheets on there, and they talk about how you want your paint to layer and grip. So if you go to Golden and you look up oil on acrylic, you'll find more information on there by scientists who have done testing on it. So this is pretty good. And if I take my cloth, I can rub it around a little bit more. This is pretty saturated, and this will dry pretty fast. Acrylic is going to dry very fast, so you could use a burnt umber acrylic with matte medium, and it'll dry really fast for you to put oil paint on top of. If you're using acrylic, you can just use your burnt umber with water and do the same, pretty much the same thing. Okay, so this is pretty good. I'm going to take a clean area on my towel. This is my towel. I'm going to fold it. And I'm just going to kind of rub this in a little bit because it'll take off any excess. It'll kind of smooth out the lines. Sometimes I really like the lines if I'm doing fur or hair. I kind of like the lines of an underpainting, but in this case, it doesn't really matter. I'm more interested in speed of drying. So this, oops, is now dried. This is, well, I wouldn't say it's dry, but it's now kind of rubbed down and it will dry quickly. By the way, I didn't mention earlier, but I have my my panel clipped to a drawing board. I just thought it would help with any bounce. So if you have a drawing board, it's one way to do it. Okay, so that's one side. And now I'm going to do the other side. I'm not going to use acrylic on this other side. Instead, I'm going to use just a little bit of oil, and I'm going to use a hog's hair bristle brush because I want it to scrub. Let me find one of those. Let's see, this is a pretty good hog's hair bristle brush. It's still small, and again, I still use larger brushes typically, but I'm going to take a little bit of oil in my paint, and I'm going to just scrub it. It's going to take a lot more elbow grease, and notice it's going on darker because I don't have the thinner happening in here, but this would be considered a best painting practice without any toxicity or very low toxicity. Of course, that depends on what's on your paint, what's inside your paint, right? Because if you're using lead paint, you got something toxic in there. Burnt umber is not really considered a toxic pigment. It comes from the earth. It's pretty much as natural as it gets. And it takes a little bit more elbow grease to get this going on. It won't dry as quickly as the one on the left. However, you also do not have solvents to deal with, so it ends up not being as toxic. So then this is kind of one way I've been working, is just adding a little drop of walnut oil to get the paint to move. And then just really getting in there. It's kind of labor intensive. Get your workout for the day from your shoulder. And notice I'm not using a soft bristle brush. Because I'm scrubbing, I can expect that the texture of the canvas is going to eat down my brush a little bit like sandpaper because there's friction going on. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more down here, and then I'm going to use that cloth and I'm going to just rub it in. Okay, so that looks pretty good. You can see the difference between the two. One is very dark by comparison. There's no solvents thinning it. Okay, so I'm going to take this other one right here, and I'm going to rub this down. And by rubbing this down, I'm hoping that, that this will dry faster. Let me move this a little bit. Okay, that this will dry faster and even out a little bit. This thing is going to collapse on top of me. You can see how rigorous I'm scrubbing it with this towel. Okay, so I'm not quite getting it as light, but it's definitely lighter, and the board is definitely saturated. Okay, there it is. So both of these are toned. Now they're toned, and they're both toned with burnt umber. Let me move this over so you can kind of see it a little bit easier. This side has mineral spirits on it, which is also called solvent. And we want to try and get this out of the studio for safety reasons. But if you have good ventilation, you can use it. And then the other side is just a drop of walnut oil and scrubbed vigorously, and then wiped down with a blue paper towel. So you can see it took off quite a bit of the paint. Okay, these two squares are now ready to dry, and we will get to them later on. Okay, so thanks a lot for joining me for the first video. There's more to come. Thanks.